Now, we also have some vocabulary to learn for this section. At the moment, we're looking strictly at what's called linear equations, and you can see the word line in there, and that just tells you that they're going to be straight line graphs. So we're not going to have any curves in this is just going to be straight line graphs. Now, the way you can identify a linear graph is there's going to be combinations of y's and x's. They can be added together, they can be subtracted together. You can just have one of each. Remember, y equals 3 is that horizontal line, x equals 2 is that vertical line. And they would all be examples of linear graphs. And we have specific names for some of these, which we're going to talk about in a second. The ones that are not linear, if you multiply x and y together, that's not going to work. If you have any powers, that's not going to work either. If you have two sets of powers, that's certainly not going to work. Y equals 5 over x might not be so obvious, but if we, instead of dividing by x, we multiply by x here, we get xy equals 5, which is not allowed. We're not allowed to multiply x and y together. Y equals x over 5 is allowed because it's the same as 1/5 x plus 0, which is actually slope-intercept form. So that's one that you've got to be a little bit careful of. Now, there are a couple of other ones that can cause trouble as well. If we have y divided by x, if we multiply both sides by x, this turns out to be perfectly linear. So we sometimes have to rearrange just to make sure they're going to work okay. And if I look at this one here, 3x over y equals 2, I multiply both sides by 2, I get 2y equals 3x. And then if I divide both sides by 2, I get y equals 3 over 2x. So that's perfectly linear as well, because that's in slope-intercept form. Some of the vocabulary we need to learn, and we're not going to talk about all these graphs immediately. Certainly the first one we've already talked about, slope-intercept. If it starts with y equals, there's going to be mx plus b, where m is your slope or gradient, and b is y-intercept. Standard form is one we're going to look at in lesson 4, where we have x's and y's on the same side. And the rule for this is, if we have this, then a, b and c must be integers. So in other words, whole numbers, positive and negative. Also for this, a shouldn't be negative, but sometimes that seems to get overlooked. Point slope formula is supposed to say y minus y1 equals mx minus x1. And the way I remember this one is, if you can see the parentheses here, notice that point also begins with p as well. So a little reminder there to figure out which one it is. Also, this is the only formula where you see the y appear twice and also the x appear twice. 4 and 5 we've already talked about a couple of times today. Y equals a number, that's your horizontal line. And x equals would be your vertical line. Now, to actually practice that in class, what we did was, and it might be a little small, I'm not quite sure how well we can see this on the video, a list of equations, and we tried to put them in the relevant box. So you might want to pause the video and see if you can figure out which one they go to, and I'll give you the answer in a few seconds. So if you actually tried that exercise, this is what you would have found. All the ones that start with y equals, that's our slope-intercept. All the ones with x's and y's on the same side is standard form. The ones that are not linear, this is because this one's squared, which is not allowed. Squares are not allowed. Square roots are not allowed. And this one, if we multiply both sides by x, we get 5 equals xy. We can't have x and y multiplied together. Horizontal lines, y equals a number. Vertical lines, x equals a number. And point slope, my clue is those parentheses. Now, our last activity today is to look at slope and y-intercept of equations again. Very similar to the warm-up, with a few more extensions. So if it starts with y equals, it's literally just as easy as looking at the first number to find the slope. Notice there's nothing on the end for this one, and that's why the y-intercept for this one is 0. Remember, if there's no number in front of the x, we can put a 1. So our slope would be 1, and our y-intercept would be -7, making sure we take the sign as well. Now, if we have questions that aren't in y equals form, we make them into y equals form. So what I did here is I just divided both sides by 10 and then simplified, because 10 over 10 is going to cancel, leaving with just y. And then I can just pick off the two numbers for my slope and y-intercept. This was also part of what we called literal equations in an earlier chapter as well, being able to solve for a particular variable. So certainly the slope isn't -7 because it doesn't start with y equals, so we need to rearrange this question. So if we add 7x to both sides, this will cancel. and then I either have 12 plus 7x or 7x plus 12 using the commutative rule, and then I can just pick off the two numbers again to find my slope and y-intercept. Now if we have it in standard form where x and y are on the same side, then I have to do a little bit more as well. I have to add 3x to both sides first. And it still doesn't say y equals, it says 2y equals. So the next step would be to divide by 2. Importantly, make sure you divide everything by 2. So not just the first term. And then 3 over 2 doesn't simplify, so that's my slope. 12 over 2 does, so that would be my y-intercept. And for the last one, I can subtract 3x from both sides. A lot of people wanted to put plus 3x for this one, and if you do that though, 3x plus 3x is 6x and it doesn't cancel. So do the opposite there, and then divide both sides by -2. Just being very careful when we do -3 divided by -2, the two negatives will cancel, giving me a positive, so I end up with positive 3 over 2. And also 12 over -2 is -6. If you're not sure, use your fraction button on your calculator, just to make sure we don't make any silly mistakes. And then from that we can actually pick out our slope and our y-intercept. And following on from that, this was the homework assignment where you were asked to write down the slope and the y-intercept. The ones in the first column you should be able to do straight away. The ones on the right hand side require a little bit more rearranging, but you could practice those questions if you wish.